And I realized we've forgotten them. I have forgotten the most fundamental question. Why Grenada? Why are you studying Grenada? Why is it of interest to anyone outside of this five-star? Because that's a question that often gets asked.
Outside of Grenada being a part of the African diaspora, me having this curiosity and wanting to be almost an expert in all things African diaspora, I've been able to, through my own studying of my history, find out that my own family have connections to the Caribbean. Maybe not Grenada directly, but whether it's Barbados or Trinidad. And so for me, that curiosity when I first came to Grenada, it felt so much like Liberia. The people, I always say, I tell people in Grenada all the time, y'all some West Africans. Like, you all act and you look and you sound like West Africans. And so for me, I instantly became curious about how do I make this connection between these two places? I did some research. I saw that there was some migrations that happened in the 1970s where Grenadians migrated to Liberia. And then as I started to look at the revolution, I also saw the years of the revolution and thought about what was happening in Liberia at the time. Particularly, we had Tolbert, who was president of our country at that time, and then his kind of progression towards socialism and understanding that this was not happening in isolation. And I became curious, well, did Tolbert, did he think about Grenada's revolution? Did he have any relationship to Morris Bishop? And so I think that those of us in the diaspora, it does us good and it gives our histories complexities when we understand them as connected and not separated. And that is part of where that curiosity came from for me.
Brilliant. And I've introduced you to a friend of mine, Shedi, who has this theory that Grenada is the Black cultural mecca of the world. And he may or may not be right, but I think that's an interesting concept to play with. And I think one of the things that really excites me, especially when I was thinking about the Exodus Collective, is really looking back at what Grenada was like at the height of the revolution and the way in which it did draw thinkers and doers and academics from all around the world, and particularly countries in West Africa, for people to really imagine what alternative futures could look like. Paolo Freire was here, Angela Davis was here, like so many people. And for me, I think I've always long held a dream of like, what could it be like for Grenada to once again hold that space? Because it is the energy of this island is very unique. It's quite untainted in a way, and in a way, anything becomes a possibility. And so when I see people like you being here, and, it just makes me feel very inspired as to what futures we can co-create, because in times like these, it's definitely needed. And unfortunately, or possibly fortunately, given the current political circumstances of what's going on, this documentary is not just ancient history. Perhaps there's a degree in which it could be a playbook for what will be needed in future. We just have very little control as to what happens around us, but we can control how we react, and to understand how people strategized about that during the days of the revolution is very exciting to me. So tell us more about the documentary that you've chosen for us to view, and why this one of all the documentaries that were made.
So this was the first time I learned about Grenada's revolution was in 2017 after watching the film The House on Cocoa Road. And I think that's kind of the film for a lot of people that brought them into the folds of Grenada's revolution. And then this was the second film. We actually watched this film the first time we came to Grenada last year. And so for me, it was the first time watching a documentary style that showed very explicit outcomes of the revolution, whether it talked about agriculture, it talked about healthcare, it talked about women's rights. And I think also it made Morris Bishop no longer just this abstract figure of a revolutionary, but a real person, right, with theories that backed what they were attempting to do in Grenada. And so the documentary actually, as it's being filmed, we know 1983, the tragedy of 1983 happened. And so I wanted this explicit like imagery and examples of what is happening in Grenada, where you can hear about how is Grenada working on its literacy rate, right? How does it combine literacy with political education? How does Grenada understand the importance of youth and people going back to the land? How does it combine land with political education? How does Grenada understand water and electricity as part of reproductive justice rights? And you see all of this coming up in this film. And that's part of why I wanted us to explore this particular one.
And so what's taking place on Saturday the 15th from 5 till 7 p.m. at TA Marryshow House, and we need to talk a little bit more about Marryshow. It's not just a screening, it's actually a conversation, right? I know that you've been working away nonstop at pulling together a stellar lineup of people, but can you give us a sneak peek as to who will be attending and why you feel that conversation is also needed, not just viewing content?
Yeah, so the goal is after watching this film, we were able to be in conversation about what people are watching. How do people understand Grenada's history in relation to other movements that is happening across the continent, whether in the Caribbean, in Africa, or even in the US, right? Because I think once again, how do we connect these Black movements that are occurring during this time period? And then you also think about a place like Cuba too, which is essential to the story of Grenada. And so we plan on hopefully have some elders present as well who can talk about some of the Zone of Peace, Grenada, their work that they're doing here. We know there was a protest that occurred in Grenada around Zone of Peace. And so how do we connect that current moment, those elders and the work that they're doing to what we see presently? And then Black Alliance for Peace also has a Zone of Peace campaign. So how do we connect that to Grenada and connect it back to the documentary? So it is this kind of threading that is happening through these conversations that I'm really excited about. And hopefully to also present Liberia as a place that be curious about. I always say that people, Black and African people, often don't think about Liberia as a place of lineage oftentimes. And I feel part of my work is placing Liberia back into the folds, right? And as a possibility, as a place to look to, as a place to see connections to, because we do know if we had people who were leaving Barbados to go to Liberia, people who were leaving Jamaica to go to Liberia, people in the US then definitely there had to be some kind of a movement from Grenada to Liberia or from Liberia to Grenada. So I'm hoping that this film screening and the conversation that comes after it is a way to be able to start off those connections and then connect it to our current realities. Because I think that is the most important. It's not just studying what has happened in the past, Sankofa, but how does the past relate to what we see right now and what we're going to see? Because I think that it makes it easier for us to imagine ways to organize ourselves when we have an example and a blueprint that is already before us. So we don't have to do the hard work of starting all over. So much of our ancestors have done that for us before. They laid the foundation. They've provided us language. They provided a theory and examples for us to think about our future. And we just need to study that and build off of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as you're talking, it really echoes something that I've said all the way along when it comes to the Exodus Collective, in terms of when we do find ourselves in alternate spaces, just because it's the tropics, just because they're beautiful beaches, doesn't mean the only thing to do is to kind of kick back and relax and drink your margaritas on the beach. Finding ways to amplify that ancestral wisdom that is already there to provide solutions for islands that are essentially on the front lines of climate change, even before any of the geopolitical stuff comes into play, dealing with the legacies of enslavement, of colonialism, of the effects that that's had on the land, on our sense of identity, on our sense of spirituality. There is so much work that needs to be done. And so when you reached out to me on Instagram, there was only one option but to say yes. And then when we were trying to explore venues and making sure that accessibility was something that we were facilitating, so you have kindly sponsored the cost of the venue. But the fact that it's taking place at TA Marryshow House in St. George's, to me, just feels so fitting. Again, another legendary Grenadian who wasn't afraid to dream and vision as to what collaboration really could look like. I can't think of a more fitting space to host that sort of future-oriented conversation. which again stands on the shoulders of the giants who've come before us.
Yes, I agree totally. And I think also having it in a space of, you know, the University of West Indies and thinking about just like the histories of movements that are happening across universities and across higher learning. And as part of Archive Liberia fall study group, we actually read two speeches from Morris Bishop, and one of them was Education is a Must, where he talked at the time about the strides that the revolution was attempting to make towards education in Grenada, and understanding that like an educated people is a people that is able to withstand destabilization, right? That when a people can be able to assess and have an analysis around what imperialism is, it makes it harder to keep them shackled. And then talking about like what is the significance of the university as a place of learning. And so I feel that this is just such a perfect place. The location as well, its accessibility to people within Grenada. And I'm just really excited to be in conversation, honestly, with Grenadians beyond just understanding the Caribbean place. People come and they kick their feet up, and it's turquoise beaches and it's margaritas, like you said, in the sunset, but that this is a real place of histories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm incredibly excited. And I hope this is just the first of many because, yeah, we need solutions and it's not a case of reinventing the wheel. There's so much wisdom. And it's really just a case of reawakening that awareness and being really proactive at coming up with solutions. So I'm very glad to be standing shoulder to shoulder with you. And also for the elders, I think Senator is one of the people who are due to be there. And I think for me, having taken part in two of the protests, I've just been blown away at their dynamism. You know, these are people in their 60s and 70s who are like, I've been marching since the days of Gary and I'm not going to stop. And I'm doing this for my grandchildren. And I'm like, okay, cool. So where are the people my age? You know,
Yes.
where
Yes.
is the next generation? And everyone has a lot on their plate. There's a lot that we have to navigate, children, careers, etc. But questioning, okay, what are we navigating all of this for? What sort of future Grenada do we want? What sort of Caribbean do we want? I think these are really important questions to be answering. And to have those conversations with like-minded people, for me, is super exciting. Super, super, super exciting. So I'm very much looking forward to it. Is there anything else that you wanted to add apart from the fact that people can book their place via the link in my bio and it's free, totally free, so no let cost be an issue? Anything else?
No, just make sure you go ahead and book. We're attempting to, the space will be about 30. So it's going to be something intimate that allows for conversation. So both of us will have the link in our bio. And I'm just looking forward to this being the first of many of these kinds of events that we host together, and to seeing everybody and hearing everyone's perspective, because the time is urgent, right? We're seeing what is happening in the world, and we're seeing how close history has continued to repeat itself. And I think that it's time now for us to be in these kinds of conversations.